Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today we've got some news out of Georgia. Yesterday, the 14th, they started doing early voting. And the numbers caught everyone off guard because it is actually up in comparison to the general election. As you can see from this chart down here, the green line represents votes cast in the runoff, the orange line votes cast in the general. And as you can see, for the first time, as opposed to keeping a pretty steady about 150,000 vote fall behind, the runoff election actually managed to catch up a bit because while mail-in voting is down, early voting is up. Mail-in voting is down almost 40%, while early voting is up almost 25%. This still means it's about the total number is about 25% lower than 2020's general election, but this is still great news for the Democrats, and the reason for that is, let's go into the numbers of the people who are actually voting. So, the immediate breakdown. 54% of people who have voted so far are white. 1/3 are black, 1.7% are Hispanic, 2% are Asian, and 9.1% chose other. This could be Pacific Islanders, people of Arabic descent, or those who just didn't want to include their race. However, this breakdown is amazing so far for the Democrats, and I'll explain why. In the general election, white people were the biggest number to vote for the GOP. In fact, the only breakdown out of the group to vote GOP were white people. Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and other all broke strongly for the Democrats. The closest was other, but that was roughly at a rate of 60% for Biden/Democrats, 40% for Republicans. And I am using the general election here because that is the total number of voters that turned out and the numbers they are using for their breakdown. Now, 61% were white to go to 54%. That is a significant drop, but it is less due to lack of white turnout and more due to higher levels of black turnout. We're talking a 4% increase that is essentially coming out of nowhere. There's also a good chunk of, it's believed, African Americans who will mark other to avoid racial discrimination and such. I will say that is not the purpose for why they collect race at the polling locations. It's due to the fact they violated the Civil Rights Act so many times, they kind of have to, or the Voting Rights Act. But this is great news for the Democrats because with this breakdown, assuming the numbers break, it will assume it's even in a favorable area for the Republicans. Numbers break a little bit more towards them than they would in the general, or did in the general. Democrats are still ahead by, if we assume any similar level of breakdown, even with a good Republican turnout. They're ahead by maybe 10 to 20,000 votes. And that's nothing to sneeze at, especially when you start factoring in the high early voting turnout. What we saw in the South during the 2020 general election was high turnout for early voting across the South. And with attempts to stymie early voting locations, successful, but it was a very limited success by the end of it. It's looking like Democrats are at the very least succeeding with turnout to an extent. Now, we won't know till Election Day how this really breaks down, but there are some more good numbers here, such as the fact that 54.5% of people who have come out are female, or self-identify as female, while 44.4% are identifying as male. Those are almost identical to the numbers which brought Joe Biden victory. There is one piece of bad news, though, for the Democrats. It is the age demographic breakdown. That's always what hurts them. So, roughly 53% of people who vote so far are over 65. This will not hold, for the record. But in the general election, only 19% of voters were over 65. For them to make up the vast majority of people voting isn't the best news for the Democrats, especially when only people over 50 broke for Trump as opposed for Biden. So Democrats have a much more shallow pool to pull from there. However, just based on statistics, many of these over 50 and over 65 voters, over 50 is about where it was at for the general election. Everything else is a bit down. This is good news for the Democrats because it means a good chunk are African American over 65 voters, which is not something I think anyone was really expecting to happen super quickly. And one other piece of information that's good for the Democrats, roughly 2.5% of votes cast so far are from non-voters, people who did not vote in the 2020 general election. Now, there's a wide variety of people they could be. However, they are most likely new voters, especially young voters registered by the Democrats. All of these things put together show very good news for the Democratic Party. As you can see right now, we have a threshold of potentially up to 3.55 or 56 million votes remaining that could be cast in this election. If we get past 2 million, I will be amazed, genuinely. But the early voting numbers and the breakdown so far are very much in favor for the Democrats. And it means this race is far from being uncompetitive right now. So with all that being said, if you liked the video, drop a like and a comment down below. If you want to see more from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell to be alerted when new content is released. I also have a Twitter, @OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link in the description below. And as always, and most importantly, have a wonderful day.